April 1945. The war is over, at least on paper. Inside a fenced American run holding camp on the outskirts of Stuttgart, the air smells of wet earth and disinfectant. Rain taps against dented helmets. A young German woman stands among dozens of others, barefoot in the mud, clutching a torn coat. A voice cuts through the drizzle. "You shave your head. Use that." She turns. On the ground, a shattered beer bottle glints under a gray sky. The order sounds routine, bureaucratic even, but its cruelty is improvised. The American sergeant, 21, sunburned, tired, won't meet her eyes. Around them, soldiers mutter about lice and sanitary measures. None of them had training for this. They've been told to keep things clean, to keep control. Nobody explained what dignity looked like after surrender. She kneels, picks up the jagged glass. The edges tremble in her grip. It's not the pain that frightens her, it's the absurdity. She can hear the laughter of men who don't want to be there. The rules have dissolved into something primal and confused. Across occupied Germany, reports estimate more than 500,000 women were detained in Allied zones after the war. Most had no charges. Some were factory workers, some wives of officers, some just unlucky to live near the wrong checkpoint. Paperwork called them suspected auxiliaries, a reality called them lost. One woman later wrote in her diary, "They told us it was for hygiene, but their faces said humiliation." She remembered the sound, the grinding scrape of glass against scalp, and the sudden silence that followed. The women didn't scream. They just kept going, one by one, their hair mixing with the mud until the rain washed it away. The young sergeant turns his back, pretending to check a clipboard. He feels something twist in his stomach. He tells himself it's protocol. Yet, when he glances at their faces, bald, bleeding, expressionless, he knows this isn't about lice. It's about control wrapped in confusion. Later that night, one of the women leans over a tin bowl of water. Her reflection stares back, half shaven, streaked with blood and rain. She doesn't recognize the person looking up. Somewhere, an engine rumbles the sound of more prisoners arriving. The reflection ripples and she whispers, "Who are we now?" Tomorrow, she'll meet the soldiers again, and see something even stranger in their eyes. Morning fog hangs low over the camp, blurring barbed wire into ghostly shapes. The same German women stand in line, heads half, shaven, thin blank, it's pulled tight against the cold. Across the yard, a young American sergeant, same one from last night, lights a cigarette with shaking hands. The ritual of command has begun again, but something in his eyes has shifted. He watches them quietly. They don't spit or curse like captured soldiers. They just stare back, silent, disciplined, almost proud. It unsettles him. These are not the enemies he was trained to hate. They look like nurses, mothers, secretaries, people who could have lived down his own street in Kansas. He remembers the order again. Hygiene, lice, prevention of disease. That's what the typed sheet said. No name, no signature, just by directive. He tries to convince himself it's standard, but deep down, he knows no regulation ever mentioned broken glass. Nearby, two soldiers argue. One says, it's what they deserve. Heard they worked for the SS. The other shrugs, maybe, but this doesn't sit right. Their voices drop when the lieutenant passes. Everyone feels the same unease, but no one wants to be first to say it aloud. Field sanitation manuals from the era did recommend head shaving for lice outbreaks, for infection control, but only with proper tools, not beer bottle shards scavenged from a trash heap. The difference between discipline and degradation was supposed to matter. Out here it doesn't. A woman in the line suddenly looks up and meets the sergeant's eyes. No hate, no plea, just confusion. That moment of quiet stares becomes unbearable. He tosses his cigarette into the mud and walks away. The smoke curls upward, mixing with the cold breath of morning. Later, as he eats from his tin mess kit, he overhears one woman whisper in German, Schautweg, while Sitzschämt. He looks away because he's ashamed. The words sting even without translation. That night, he writes in his notebook, "They told us to keep them clean, but what are we cleaning?" He shuts the book before anyone can see. Tomorrow, the confusion will deepen. A new officer arrives, with orders that don't make sense to anyone. The next morning arrives with a thud of boots and the snap of fresh orders. A jeep rolls through the mud, splashing gray water across the camp fence. Inside sits a new officer, pressed uniform, clean gloves, eyes hidden behind dust, mirrored goggles. He carries a stack of mimeographed papers, edges still damp with ink. The heading reads, Directive Hygiene Enforcement, Occupied Zone C. No seal, no name, just orders from nowhere. The officer gathers the guards. Command wants these enforced. He says flatly. The sergeant from Kansas squints. Sir, these look unofficial. The lieutenant's jaw tightens. Everything's unofficial now, Sergeant. You follow what's on paper. The men nod, but something about the tone, detached, tired, already defensive, tells them even he doesn't believe it. The camp's only office is a canvas tent where rain seeps through bullet holes. A clerk, barely 20, stamps the new forms without reading them. The ink blurs, turning hygiene into humiliation in the half. Light, no one laughs, declassified U.S. Army memos decades later would reveal that in May 1945, communication lines were chaos. Different commands issued conflicting policies on handling civilians, suspected auxiliaries, and POW. Some camps enforced delousing with clippers, others used chemicals, and a few, like this one, made up rules on the spot. One guard mutters, "We're just patching leaks with paper." The officer glares, "Do your duty." That afternoon, the women are gathered again. The order now includes head shaving for disciplinary hygiene. The sergeant reads it aloud, but his voice shakes on the last words. He looks over the crowd, faces blank, eyes hollow. No one reacts, not even with anger. The silence feels heavier than protest. Later, a German woman whispers to another, "They don't know why either. It's true. Nobody in this camp understands who's truly in command anymore." The war has ended, but obedience hasn't. In his notebook, the sergeant writes one sentence. When the orders have no author, the guilt belongs to everyone. He closes it, unsure whether he's writing a report or a confession. Outside, thunder rolls. The fences rattle in the wind. The camp feels suspended in time, without map or meaning. Tomorrow, it'll grow bigger, more crowded, and even less defined. By late May 1945, Germany was a patchwork of wire and canvas. Camps like this one sprouted overnight, built from scavenged timber, leftover barbed wire, and desperation. They weren't on any official map. The war was over, yet thousands of people still lived as if it weren't. The Stuttgart camp now held more than 2,000 detainees, mostly women. No real chain of command. No posted schedule, just rumors. The guards rotated weekly. Some were polite, some cruel, most just confused. The word POW didn't even fit anymore. These weren't soldiers, they were civilians in uniforms, nurses, secretaries, wives. The Geneva rules blurred somewhere between victory and vengeance. Every morning, the same ritual: roll call, delousing, rations. The line to the sanitation tent stretched past the fence. A corporal poured a powder into a metal bucket, pretending it was disinfectant. A few of the women were handed razors. Others were told to use what's there, broken bottles, dull scissors, anything sharp. The rules changed daily depending on who stood guard. Reports later estimated over 2,000 such ad hoc temporary enclosures were created across U.S. occupied Germany that summer. Some lasted days, others months. Food shortages, overcrowding, and unclear jurisdiction turned them into gray zones of legality. The Red Cross visited only a fraction. One woman, a former translator, whispered to a friend, "We're ghosts between wars." That line would later appear in her diaries, muggled out by a sympathetic medic. At night, the camp buzzed with half languages. English orders shouted over German pleas. The guards spoke of home, of baseball games and girls back in Ohio, while the prisoners hummed lullabies under blankets that smelled of wet hay. In one corner of the yard, under a makeshift shelter of tin sheets, a woman crouched beside a small puddle. She picked up a fragment of glass, a leftover from the hygiene ritual, and hid it inside her coat. It caught the faintest glint of moonlight. That shard would become her only mirror, her silent protest against erasure. As the camp grew, names were replaced by numbers. Faces blurred, yet that hidden piece of glass held something alive, a reflection that refused to vanish. Tomorrow, it will cut again, not her skin this time, but the illusion of obedience. Night has folded over the camp like a damp blanket. The fires have burned low, leaving only the sound of boots pacing gravel. In the far corner, beneath a rusted tin roof, one woman kneels over her secret, the shard of glass she hid in her coat. Moonlight catches the edge, throwing a pale streak across her face. Half of her scalp is shaved smooth, the other half tangled and wild. She studies the reflection as if searching for the person she used to be. Another prisoner, a nurse from Cologne, crouches beside her. "Why keep it?" she whispers. The first woman doesn't answer. Instead, she traces her finger along the cracked surface. "Because it still shows truth," she finally murmurs. The glass is jagged but honest, unlike the words of men with clipboards. Across the fence, guards drink black coffee from mess tins. The young sergeant from Kansas watches them. He's been thinking about the woman with the glass since yesterday. There's something defiant in her silence, something the war was supposed to crush, but didn't. The next morning, she's ordered to line up again. When her turn comes, she raises her chin and says quietly, "No glass." Her voice trembles, but she doesn't move. The corporal hesitates. Around them, the line stiffens. Nobody expected resistance, especially not from women who have lost everything. Psychological reports compiled in 1946 would later describe a strange phenomenon among female detainees. Identity trauma, they called it. Shaving wasn't just physical, it was symbolic, stripping them of the markers of self. But in this camp, that trauma begins to turn. Humiliation hardens into quiet rebellion. By midday, whispers spread. Some refuse the glass, others share contraband razors, passing them hand to hand like weapons made of mercy. The guards, exhausted and indifferent, start looking the other way. That night, the nurse finds her friend again, still holding the shard. Together, they place it in a small tin box under a plank of wood. "If we live," the nurse says, "we'll remember this." Above them, floodlights sweep across wire and shadows. The sergeant glances toward their corner, but pretends not to see. Something in him has shifted, too. Tomorrow he'll act on it, and risk everything for one small act of decency. Rain returns the next morning, thin, cold, relentless. The mud sucks at boots, the sky hangs low and metallic. Private Donnelly, 19 years old, stands by the sanitation tent holding a clipboard he barely knows how to use. His uniform is too big, his orders too vague. He's supposed to make sure the procedure continues. But every part of him wants to stop it. The woman with the hidden shard steps forward again. Her eyes lock on his. "No glass," she repeats in a voice that's not loud, but final. The guard beside Donnelly raises his rifle slightly, not aiming, just asserting presence. Donnelly swallows hard. Something in the woman's stare, calm, stripped of fear, disarms him more than any weapon could. He looks down at the filthy bucket filled with cloudy water and fragments of bottles. "Forget it," he mutters, handing her a rag instead. "Clean with this." The guard blinks, confused, orders private. Donnelly shakes his head. "I said it's fine." The moment stretches too long. Then the guard looks away, pretending not to notice. That's how rebellion begins in war. Not with shouting, but with a single soldier deciding not to see. He helps her rinse her scalp with a rag, squeezing warm water from his own canteen. Steam rises from the metal cup, the faint smell of soap mixing with mud and rust. For a second, the camp doesn't feel like a cage. It feels human. Reports from that era show that more than 70% of American occupation troops were under 20. 5 kids who'd seen too much, told too little. Most weren't trained to handle civilians, trauma, or guilt. Donnelly was one of thousands caught between duty and conscience. The woman whispers, "Dank." He doesn't answer, just nods once. A small act, invisible to command, unforgettable to both. That evening, he sits alone behind the jeep, notebook open, rain dotting the page. He writes, "Today I didn't follow the rule." Maybe that's what following the rule should have meant. But mercy has consequences. The lieutenant sees everything, even what men try to hide. Tomorrow, Donnelly's quiet defiance will echo through the camp, and not kindly. By dawn, Private Donnelly knows he's in trouble. The lieutenant's shadow stretches long across the mud, boots polished, eyes sharp. He carries the morning report in one hand and yesterday's rumor in the other. "Private," he says, voice flat, "you deviated from hygiene protocol." Donnelly stands stiff, mud drying on his sleeves. "Sir, it wasn't necessary. The glass, not your call." The lieutenant cuts him off. Around them, guards pretend to stay busy, ears straining. The lieutenant steps closer. "Orders are orders. You follow them, even when they're ugly. That's what makes them orders." There's no shouting, no courtroom. Just quiet punishment, extra duty, ration cuts, night watch rotations. In war, mercy is treated like rust. It spreads if left unchecked. Later that afternoon, the woman sees him cleaning the latrine trench, face pale, eyes distant. She doesn't speak, but when a guard isn't looking, she leaves a small piece of bread on the ledge near him. He pretends not to notice, then pockets it anyway. Donnelly's small act of humanity doesn't vanish, it ripples. Other guards start hesitating, just for a heartbeat, when issuing the glass order. One lets a woman keep her headscarf. Another delays inspection until rain makes everything impossible to enforce. Quiet disobedience becomes its own contagion. Field discipline reports from late May 1940. 5. Mention instances of insubordination through empathy. The phrase sounds bureaucratic, but inside it lives this very moment, a young man punished for caring. That night, Donnelly sits on his bunk, wiping his rifle that no longer feels like authority. The lieutenant walks by, glances once, and says coldly, "You think you're helping them, you're helping chaos." The words hang like smoke. But Donnelly doesn't argue. He knows the truth. Chaos is already here. It's in the orders that come from nowhere, in the rules that contradict the conscience. Outside, floodlights buzz against the drizzle. The camp sleeps uneasy. From the far corner, faint voices hum a lullaby in German. It's the sound of defiance, low and steady, weaving through barbed wire and rain. Tomorrow, those whispers will grow louder. The women are done obeying quietly. The storm breaks before dawn. Rain lashes the tents. Wind howls through torn tarps. And yet the camp doesn't stir with panic. It stirs with decision. By sunrise, a strange calm settles. The women line up as usual, but today they do not reach for the broken glass. They just stand there, heads held high, eyes unblinking. Private Donnelly watches from the gate, jaw tight. The lieutenant shouts once, twice, his voice echoing against wet metal. No one moves. The guards glance at each other, waiting for someone to force the issue, but no one does. The silence grows heavy, like a wall no rifle can break. It starts small. One woman steps out of line and begins washing her face with rainwater instead of shaving. Another wraps her scarf back around her head. Soon the entire formation follows. Within minutes the glass ritual evaporates. The guards, drenched and exhausted, let it happen. Command doesn't issue new orders. Maybe they're too busy. Maybe they don't want to know. By noon, the lieutenant calls it temporary leniency, but the camp knows better. Something has shifted. For the first time, the women dictate their own routine, choosing how to wash, when to stand, even daring to laugh softly at mealtime. It's rebellion disguised as compliance. Red Cross inspectors visiting similar U.S. enclosures that summer would later report irregular hygiene compliance. The phrase hides a truth. Quiet resistance spread faster than disease. In the evening, Donnelly walks the perimeter. The woman with the hidden shard catches his eye. She doesn't smile, doesn't thank him, just nods once. The gesture feels like an unspoken alliance between captor and captive, both trapped in a system neither believes in. The lieutenant keeps pacing, pretending control. His boots sink deeper into the mud each round, as if the earth itself rejects authority. That night, the guards lower their voices. No one mentions punishment. No one enforces the rule. A fragile peace hums between rain and whispers, a truce born from exhaustion and small acts of courage. But peace, in war's aftermath, never lasts long. Word of defiance always travels upward, and tomorrow, higher command will arrive to investigate what the lieutenant's report conveniently left out. By the third week of June 1945, the camp looks almost orderly again, too orderly. Mud raked smooth, tents aligned, guards stiff at attention. A jeep roars through the gate carrying a visiting colonel, his uniform immaculate, his clipboard heavy. The lieutenant meets him halfway, saluting with forced precision. Everyone knows what this means: inspection. The colonel strides through the rows, glancing at faces, fences, and logbooks. "Everything in order, Lieutenant?" he asks, voice bored, rehearsed. The lieutenant hands him a neatly written report. It reads, "Sanitation sufficient, discipline stable, morale contained." The colonel nods without reading further. He doesn't ask about broken glass. He doesn't notice the razors passed in secret or the unshaven heads under scarves. Donnelly watches from a distance, heart pounding. The colonel inspects the sanitation tent for 5 seconds, notes the improved compliance, then moves on. Every trace of rebellion has been buried under paperwork. One guard mutters, "Guess it's over." Donnelly shakes his head. No, it's just hidden. Historical records back him. Less than 15% of informal POW complaints ever reached Allied higher command in 1945. Most incidents vanished in bureaucratic fog, replaced with sanitized summaries. The truth didn't die, it was simply unrecorded. That afternoon, the colonel finishes his rounds, signs the inspection sheet, and says the 3 words that close every uncomfortable chapter: "Carry on, Lieutenant." The jeep engine growls, spraying mud as it leaves. The camp exhales, but it's not relief. It's resignation. Later, in the mess tent, Donnelly overhears the lieutenant dictating a letter. Minor resistance observed, now resolved. His pen scratches across the page, erasing 2 weeks of moral chaos in a single line. Across the yard, the woman with the shard listens to the fading sound of the jeep. She whispers almost to herself, "They erased it with ink." Her voice trembles, not from fear but from disbelief that silence can be so efficient. As night falls, the camp feels heavier. The rebellion hasn't failed. It's just been swallowed whole by official language. Tomorrow, the gates will open for transfers. Some women will leave this place behind, but one of them won't stay silent. She's already planning to write everything down. Spring turns into the rubble heat of 1946. The camp gates creak open for the last time. The women are handed slips of paper marked "Released no charge," no apology, no explanation. They walk past the same guards who once barked orders. Now those men just stare at the ground. The woman with the shard clutches a small bundle of clothes and steps through the wire. Beyond the fence lies Stuttgart half-bombed, half-rebuilding, streets filled with ruins and ration lines. She wraps her scarf tightly around her still, growing hair. The world outside feels emptier than the camp ever did. When she reaches her old neighborhood, people stop and look. A woman with a shaven head, even months after surrender, means only one thing in post: War Germany, collaboration. Whispers follow her, children point. A shopkeeper refuses to serve her. The punishment continues, now carried by rumor instead of rifles. Historians estimate that over 100,000 German women were accused of fraternization during the Allied occupation, some truly guilty, most just surviving. Shaved heads became social scars, visible sentences for invisible crimes. One afternoon, she hears a knock on her door. It's Donnelly, civilian clothes now, older by a lifetime, though barely 20. He says he's passing through before heading home. They talk for a few minutes, standing in the ruins of what was once her kitchen. Neither mentions the camp directly. He glances at her headscarf, then at the floor. "You made it," he says quietly. She nods. "So did you." He leaves her a bar of soap, rationed from his own supply. Small, ordinary, it feels like closure. That night, she unwraps the tin box. The glass shard still rests inside, faintly clouded, edges dulled. She decides to write. On scrap paper, using a borrowed pencil, she begins, "We were told it was for hygiene, but it was never about hygiene." Outside, church bells ring for the first time since the bombing. The city tries to sound whole again. Inside, she keeps writing, her reflection flickering in the tiny piece of glass. Tomorrow, her words will travel beyond these ruins, into history's blind spots. By the early 1950s, Europe wants to forget. Cities hum with new factories, children laugh in rebuilt schools, and the memory of captivity fades into polite silence. But for a handful of women, forgetting isn't an option. Their stories live in scraps of notebooks, folded letters, and fragments of memory scratched into margins. Among them, one from Stuttgart writes a manuscript no one will publish. The title is simple, "The Glass Order." Editors reject it. Too minor, they say, too emotional, no proof. In those years, Germany wants heroes or villains, not women who endured humiliation between paperwork and rumor. The public insists such orders never existed. Americans, they say, were humane liberators. The truth sounds inconvenient, so it's dismissed. In dusty university archives, the testimonies pile up handwritten, untranslated. One historian in the 1990s finds the Stuttgart account among them. She cross-references Allied documents and discovers a phrase buried in a logistics memo. Unrecorded hygiene directives, 12th Army Group, May 1945. It's not confirmation, but it's not denial either. The edges of fact and myth blur like smoke. The writer's voice echoes through decades. We were not angels, but neither were they. It's a confession without bitterness, an accusation without hate. Her words shift the narrative from guilt to confusion, from revenge to survival. Meanwhile, Donnelly's name surfaces once in a declassified personnel file marked Disciplinary Observation, June 1945. No details. Just silence wrapped in bureaucracy. By 1998, researchers cite 4 first-hand testimonies describing the glass-shaving order. Small in number, massive in implication. Each voice turns a rumor into evidence, a memory into history. In a televised interview, one survivor says, "They called it hygiene. I called it a mirror." That line, calm, haunting, resonates more than any statistic ever could. The Stuttgart woman's notebook finally reaches a museum in the early 2000s, its pages yellowed, ink faded. On the inside cover, a single line remains legible. Truth cuts slow, but it leaves no scars. Now, decades later, her story stands as both testimony and warning. What was once silence becomes documentation. What was once humiliation becomes history. And somewhere, preserved behind glass, the shard itself waits, catching light from a new century. Tomorrow, that light will reveal what even memory couldn't erase. In a quiet museum in Berlin, the air smells faintly of dust and metal polish. Behind a pane of glass sits a small artifact most visitors overlook. A dull, uneven fragment of bottle glass, labeled simply, "Recovered from U.S. POW enclosure, Stuttgart, 1945. The surface catches the light like a wounded mirror. A guide tells a school group that historians aren't sure of its exact story, just that it was found wrapped in cloth beside a woman's diary. The kids move on quickly, but for anyone who lingers, the shard speaks without words. It reflects everything the war left behind. Obedience without understanding, mercy punished, shame mistaken for justice. In the reflection, the viewer sees not soldiers or prisoners, but blurred shapes, human faces folded into the same confusion. The past refuses to stay heroic or clean. It's jagged, like the glass itself. Reports indicate only 4 verified testimonies mention this glass order. Yet across Europe, hundreds of similar accounts ripple beneath official history. Each one bends light differently, catching the fragments of truth that paper archives could never hold. A former U.S. chaplain once wrote privately, after victory, "We found ourselves still at war. With guilt, with chaos, with our own reflection." His words never made it into textbooks, but they echo here in this room decades later. The glass doesn't accuse, it remembers. It remembers the young sergeant who looked away, the private who hesitated, the lieutenant who followed orders he didn't believe, and the woman who kept this very shard as proof that confusion can wound deeper than cruelty. Visitors lean closer, and for an instant, their faces merge with its surface, past and present collapsing into one blurred reflection. That's the quiet brilliance of history. It doesn't forgive, but it forces you to see. In the end, the shard stands for something larger than punishment. It stands for the strange space between good intentions and harm, the no man's land of human behavior when rules lose meaning. The plaque beside it reads, "From orders no one understood." A single beam of light hits the glass, scattering reflections across the dark wall, tiny flashes that look almost like memory itself, refusing to die out.